Here raced the first part of your story, packed with intensity, twists, and deep emotional tension. Let me know what you think. I used to believe that trust was like gravity, an unshakable force that held everything in place. No matter how turbulent life got, I thought my marriage was something I could rely on. A constant. A foundation. But now, sitting in my car outside an unfamiliar house in the dead of night, watching a shadow move behind the curtain of a dimly lit window, I realized I was a fool. The past few months had been a slow unraveling, a descent into something I couldn't name at first. It wasn't the typical signs, the cliches people talk about, like perfume that wasn't mine or lipstick stains on a collar. No, it was more insidious. The way she started laughing at things I wasn't in on. The way her phone never left her hand, but her responses to my messages became short and delayed. The way she started looking at me, not with love, not with hate, but with something worse. Indifference. Then came the locked phone. The nights out that stretched too long. The showers as soon as she got home, as if she were washing something off. And then the slip. The one detail she didn't realize didn't add up. She told me she was going to dinner with coworkers. Some new restaurant downtown. We'll probably grab drinks after, she had said, barely glancing at me while scrolling on her phone. But an hour later, when I called just to check in, she answered with a hushed voice. I'm still at the office. My stomach twisted. You said you were at dinner. Silence. Then a nervous chuckle. Oh yeah, we're heading there now. She hung up before I could ask anything else. That was it. That was the moment. The thread snapped and I knew I had to pull. I called her best friend, Megan, someone I knew was supposed to be at this so-called dinner. She picked up on the second ring. Hey, weird question, I said, keeping my voice light. How's the restaurant? A pause. Then confusion. What restaurant? Cold. That was the only way to describe the feeling that crawled up my spine. The one you guys went to. With her. More silence. Then Megan cleared her throat. I haven't seen her in a couple of weeks. I felt my fingers go numb. Oh, got it. Never mind. I hung up before she could ask anything else. Before my voice could betray the rage bubbling under my skin. My wife wasn't at dinner. She wasn't at the office. So where the hell was she? That question led me here. To this street. To this house. To this moment. I had tracked her location using the family sharing app on her phone. Something she had forgotten about, or maybe she thought I never paid attention to. But I did. I paid attention to everything now. The house was unfamiliar. Sitting at the end of a cul-de-sac. Quiet except for the faint glow of a porch light. Her car was in the driveway. My wife was inside. But with who? I sat there for minutes, my heart hammering against my ribs, my pulse a violent drumbeat in my ears. Part of me wanted to be wrong. Maybe there was an explanation. Maybe this was all in my head. Then I saw it. The front door cracked open just enough for someone to step out. A man. Shirtless. Smirking. He stretched like he had just finished a workout. No, not a workout. Something else. And then I saw her. She followed him out, laughing, running a hand through her hair, her clothes slightly disheveled. She looked up at him with a gaze I hadn't seen directed at me in years. And he looked familiar. Too familiar. Because he was my younger brother. Diving deeper into the confrontation and emotions. I didn't realize I had opened the car door until my feet hit the pavement. There was a ringing in my ears, a deafening hum that drowned out the sound of crickets, the distant barking of a dog, the rustling of leaves in the night breeze. My fists clenched at my sides. My breath came fast and uneven, but I couldn't feel any of it. The world had narrowed down to two people standing on that porch, laughing like nothing else existed. My younger brother. My wife. I had seen enough movies, read enough stories about betrayal to think I knew what it felt like. That gut punch moment when the truth slams into you with the force of a wrecking ball. But nothing prepared me for this. Nothing prepared me for the way my own blood had a smirk on his face. So goddamn casual. Like he hadn't just done the unforgivable. Like he wasn't standing there, shirtless, in the doorway of some stranger's house with my wife looking up at him like he was the center of her universe. I stepped forward. Not running. Not storming. Just moving with an energy that felt entirely out of my control. My wife must have caught the movement out of the corner of her eye, because suddenly, her whole body went rigid. She turned her head, eyes locking onto mine, and for the first time in months, hell, maybe years, she looked genuinely shocked to see me. I expected guilt, panic, some sign that she realized just how badly she had ***** up. Instead, she had the audacity to roll her eyes. What the hell are you doing here? She snapped, her voice sharp, defensive, like I was the one intruding. Like I was the one ruining her night. That was it. That was the moment something inside me cracked wide open. I ignored her, my eyes locking onto my brother. He was watching me, expression unreadable. Hands in his pockets like this was just another Friday night. Like he wasn't standing in the middle of a goddamn disaster. You. My voice came out hoarse, barely controlled. How long? He didn't answer right away. He just sighed, rubbing the back of his neck, as if this whole thing was just inconvenient for him. Then, finally, he muttered, "Does it matter?" I saw red. I don't even remember lunging. 1 second I was standing there, barely breathing, and the next, my hands were on his collar, shoving him back against the doorframe. His eyes went wide, and for the first time, I saw something other than indifference on his face, surprise, maybe even fear. "Good." My wife gasped. "Are you serious right now? Let him go." I ignored her. "How long?" I repeated through gritted teeth, every muscle in my body trembling with the effort not to swing. He let out a breath, glancing toward my wife, like he was looking for backup. And then, with a shrug, he muttered, 6 months. 6 months. Something in my chest twisted so violently I thought I might actually be sick. 6 months of lying. 6 months of her sneaking around behind my back, of my own brother, the kid I used to protect, the kid I used to defend against school bullies, sinking a knife into my back with a smug FING smile. And neither of them had the decency to look sorry. I let go, shoving him back so hard he stumbled, nearly tripping over the threshold. He caught himself, rolling his shoulders like this was all just another dumb argument. "This is ridiculous." My wife scoffed, crossing her arms. "You're being dramatic." Dramatic. Dramatic? She had just blown up our entire life, destroyed everything we had built together, and she thought I was the problem? I took a step back, dragging a hand through my hair, my breath coming in sharp bursts. I had come here expecting something. Maybe a confession. Maybe even an apology. Instead, I got two people who didn't give a damn. And that hurt more than anything, diving even deeper into the raw emotions and tension. I stood there, the night air pressing in around me, thick and suffocating. My wife, no, not my wife, not anymore, was staring at me like I was the one making a scene. My brother, the person I had grown up with, the kid whose scraped knees I used to patch up, was looking at me with boredom like he was waiting for me to leave so they could go back to whatever disgusting thing they were doing before I showed up. The betrayal was one thing. The affair. The months of lies. The nights I sat alone at home, waiting, worrying, wondering what was wrong with our marriage when all along it wasn't our marriage that was broken. It was her. But the worst part? The absolute worst part? Neither of them cared. She sighed loudly, shifting her weight onto one leg, arms still crossed. "What do you want me to say?" I let out a sharp, bitter laugh. "You don't have anything to say for yourself?" She shrugged. Shrugged. Like we were talking about forgetting to take the trash out, not about her sleeping with my own goddamn brother. "I mean, what do you want? An apology," she said, tilting her head. "Would that make you feel better?" I had never hit a woman in my life, never even considered it, but in that moment I understood why people threw things when they were angry. I wanted to grab something, anything, and smash it against the ground just to hear something shatter. Because that was what was happening inside me. Every memory, every promise, every moment I thought we had meant something, it was all shattering. "You're unbelievable," I muttered, shaking my head. She rolled her eyes. "Oh, come on. Don't act so innocent. You really think our marriage was perfect? You think you were the perfect husband?" And there it was. The twist. The attempt to flip the script, to put even an ounce of blame on me. I exhaled through my nose, gripping the back of my neck. "You're seriously trying to blame me for this?" She let out a dry laugh, looking away like this whole thing was exhausting for her. "Look, I didn't plan for this to happen, okay? It just did." I turned to my brother. He was watching the exchange in silence, arms loose at his sides, still standing there shirtless like some smug bastard who thought he had one. "How the hell could you do this?" I asked, my voice dangerously low. "To me? To us?" He exhaled through his nose, shaking his head slightly. "Look, man, I didn't mean for you to find out like this." "Find out?" I repeated, my voice rising. "You didn't mean for me to find out? Not that you didn't mean for it to happen." He didn't say anything, just looked at me like he almost felt bad. But not quite. Something inside me snapped. I turned to my wife, jabbing a finger toward the car. "Get in." She blinked. "Excuse me?" "Get in the car," I repeated. "Now." She scoffed, glancing at my brother like he might back her up. But he just watched, still silent. She let out a sharp, humorless laugh. Or what? I took a step closer, not touching her, not threatening her, but making sure she saw me. Not the doormat she had walked over for months. Not the naive idiot who had waited up for her while she was doing this. I swear to God, if you don't get in that car right now, you're gonna wish you had, I said, my voice low and firm. For the first time that night, something flickered in her expression. Not fear, not regret, but uncertainty. Like she wasn't sure if she had miscalculated something. Finally, with a dramatic sigh, she rolled her eyes and stomped past me, yanking the car door open and throwing herself into the passenger seat. I turned back to my brother. He stood there, arms crossed now, watching. I could see it in his face. He thought this was his win. That he had taken something from me. That he had beaten me. But he hadn't. Because I wasn't done yet. Without another word, I turned and walked to the car, yanking my door open and sliding into the driver's seat. As I pulled away from the curb, I didn't look back. Not at the house. Not at my brother. Not at the mess they had made. Because I wasn't leaving defeated. I was leaving with a plan. The drive home was silent. Not the comfortable kind of silence. Not the peaceful, exhausted, end-of-the-day quiet we used to share. No, this was something else entirely. This was the kind of silence that swallowed everything. That made the air thick and heavy. The kind where every second stretched too long. Where you could almost hear the thoughts running wild inside your own head. She sat in the passenger seat with her arms crossed. Her body angled away from me like I was some kind of inconvenience. Like I was the one who had ruined her night. I could feel the anger still burning under my skin, hot and pulsing. But it was different now. Less explosive, more contained. I wasn't going to waste another second yelling at her. Demanding answers she wasn't going to give me. I had what I needed. The truth. And now I had control. I pulled into the driveway, cutting the engine. For a long moment, neither of us moved. She just sat there, staring straight ahead, her jaw clenched tight. Then, with a sigh, she unbuckled her seatbelt and reached for the door handle. Don't. My voice was calm. Even. But it was enough to make her freeze. She turned to look at me, brows furrowed. What? I exhaled slowly, gripping the steering wheel, staring straight ahead. We're not done. She let out a sharp laugh, shaking her head. Oh, we're not? What else do you want? A play-by-play. A detailed breakdown of every single time I shut up. Her mouth snapped shut, eyes widening slightly. I turned to face her, keeping my expression unreadable. You're going to tell me why? She scoffed, rolling her eyes. Oh my God, we already went over this. I told you no, I cut in, my voice sharper now. You haven't told me anything. She let out a breath, shaking her head like she was exhausted from all this, like she was the one suffering here. Fine. You want the truth? Here it is. She turned fully toward me, folding her arms over her chest, expression set. I was bored. I felt something inside me go cold. She kept going. You think our marriage was perfect? You think we were happy? Jesus, we haven't been happy in years, and you know it. But you just ignored it, kept pretending everything was fine, acting like we were some perfect couple when we weren't. My hands clenched into fists against my thighs, but I stayed quiet, letting her dig her own grave. She sighed, leaning back against the seat. And then your brother was just there. And he actually listened to me. He actually saw me. I turned my head slowly, my eyes locking onto hers. Saw you? I repeated, my voice low. She didn't even flinch. Yeah. Unlike you. I stared at her, trying to wrap my head around the sheer audacity of what she was saying. She cheated. She lied. She destroyed our marriage, and now she wanted to make it my fault? You know, I said, voice eerily calm, I almost wish you would have just told me you didn't love me anymore. That would have been easier. She let out a bitter laugh. Would it? Yes, I said simply. Because at least then you wouldn't have pissed on our vows and called it rain. She huffed, looking away. Whatever. And that was it. That was the moment I knew she felt nothing. No regret. No remorse. Just pure selfishness. I inhaled deeply, gripping the wheel so tightly I thought it might snap. Then I let out a slow breath and unclenched my fists. All right, I said finally, nodding to myself. If that's how you want to play this, fine. She glanced at me warily. What do you mean? I smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. It was something else. Something sharper. You'll see. And with that, I pushed open my door and stepped out, leaving her sitting there, confused. Because she had no idea what was coming next. I walked into the house first, not bothering to hold the door open for her. She followed a few steps behind, her heels clicking against the floor. Annoyed, impatient, like she was the one being inconvenienced. The moment we stepped inside, the silence stretched out between us again. The air in our home, our former home in my mind, felt wrong. Like it had been tainted. Like it didn't belong to me anymore. I stood there for a second, just feeling it. The weight of the betrayal, the disgust creeping under my skin, the realization that every inch of this house, every couch, every counter, every goddamn room was tied to a lie. She let out a loud, dramatic sigh behind me. So what now? I turned slowly, tilting my head. What now? She threw her hands up. Yeah, what do you want? You dragged me back here like I'm some kind of criminal, but newsflash, you don't own me. I took a slow step forward, watching as she tensed ever so slightly. You think this is funny? I asked, my voice low, steady. She scoffed. Oh my God. Stop being so dramatic. There it was again. That word. She was treating this like it was some minor disagreement, some little mistake I should just get over. Like it wasn't the complete and utter destruction of everything we had built. I felt the rage coil tight in my stomach, but I didn't let it out. Not yet. Instead, I exhaled slowly and nodded. Okay. Her eyes narrowed. Okay. Yeah. I said. You're right. You're not a criminal. You don't owe me anything. You made your choice. And now I'm making mine. She crossed her arms, shifting her weight. And what choice is that? I smiled. A slow, deliberate smile that wasn't friendly in the slightest. I'm divorcing you. Her expression didn't change right away. For a second, she just stood there, processing, blinking like I had spoken in another language. Then, finally, she rolled her eyes. Oh, please. You're not divorcing me. I didn't react. Didn't flinch. I already called a lawyer. Her face twitched. Just a flicker, just for a second. But I saw it. I pressed forward. Everything is already in motion. By this time next week, the papers will be in your hands. You'll sign them and we'll be done. She let out a short, bitter laugh. You're bluffing. I stepped closer, dropping my voice. Try me. She stared at me, her lips pressing into a thin line, her fingers gripping her own arms tightly. Then, for the first time that night, I saw something other than arrogance. Other than smug indifference. I saw fear. Not fear of me. No, she knew me better than that. But fear of what this meant. Fear of the control slipping from her fingers. And that's when it hit me. She thought she had me wrapped around her little finger. She thought I was so desperate, so weak that I'd fight for her. Beg for her. That I'd scream and cry and try to win her back. She wanted that. She expected that. But I wasn't playing her game. Her jaw tightened. You're serious. Dead serious. She let out a harsh breath, glancing away for a second before shaking her head. You don't even know what you're doing. I know exactly what I'm doing. She laughed again, but it wasn't confident this time. It was forced. Strained. What, you think you'll just move on? You think it's that easy? She narrowed her eyes. You think some judge is just gonna hand you everything? I let my smile widen just slightly. Oh, don't worry. I'll get everything I want. Her throat bobbed as she swallowed. I could see the calculations running through her head. The way she was trying to figure out if she had underestimated me. And she had. Because the thing about betrayal is that it doesn't just break you. It sharpens you. And I was sharper than I had ever been. She didn't speak for a long moment, just stood there, shifting her weight, arms still crossed like she was trying to keep herself together. I could almost hear the gears in her head turning, scrambling for control. I knew her too well. I knew how she operated, how she twisted situations in her favor, how she relied on charm and manipulation to get what she wanted. But this time, she had nothing, no excuses, no sweet words to reel me back in. And she knew it. So that's it? She finally said, her voice quieter now. I tilted my head slightly. What else is there? Her lips pressed together into a thin line. I could see the flash of something in her eyes, something she was trying to bury. Panic. It was small, barely there, but I recognized it. Because for the first time, she was realizing what she had done. Not because she regretted cheating. Not because she cared about me, but because she was starting to understand what losing me actually meant. I turned away, heading toward the bedroom. I could feel her staring at my back, but I didn't stop. I pushed open the door, stepped inside, and flicked on the light. The room looked the same as always, but now it felt like a crime scene. The bed where I had spent countless nights waiting for her to come home. The dresser with the stupid little trinkets we had picked up from vacations, the framed photos of a life that was never real. The closet half full of clothes belonging to a woman I didn't recognize anymore. I moved toward the closet and grabbed a suitcase. Behind me, I heard her footsteps. What are you doing? I didn't answer. I just unzipped the suitcase and started pulling her clothes off the hangers. She let out a sharp, incredulous laugh. Are you kidding me? I kept going. Shirts, dresses, jackets, I threw them into the suitcase without care, shoving them down, making space. She rushed forward, grabbing my wrist. Stop. I yanked my arm free without looking at her. You don't live here anymore. Her breath hitched just for a second. You can't be serious. I turned to face her, my expression calm. You think I'm gonna let you keep sleeping in my house? Eating my food? Lying next to me like nothing happened? I let out a small, humorless laugh. No. We're done. She blinked, shaking her head. You can't just throw me out. Watch me. Her eyes darkened. Legally, I live here too. I smirked. Not for long. That flicker of panic in her eyes returned. I could see the realization sinking in. This wasn't a fight she could win. I reached past her, grabbed the rest of her things, and shoved them into the suitcase. She stepped back, watching me with clenched fists. You're being so dramatic. I exhaled slowly, straightening up, staring her down. You lost the right to tell me how to react the second you spread your legs for my brother. Her face twisted with something: anger, shame, frustration. You really think you're gonna find someone better than me? She snapped. And there it was. The arrogance. The belief that she was irreplaceable. That I was some pathetic, desperate man who would struggle without her. I let out a slow breath, shaking my head. You're not as special as you think you are. Her lips parted slightly, her breath hitching like I had actually wounded her. But I didn't care. I zipped up the suitcase and shoved it into her arms. Get out. She didn't move right away, just stared at me, her jaw tightening like she was still trying to think of a way out of this. But there wasn't one. And she knew it. After a long moment, she let out a slow, shaky breath and turned toward the door. She walked through the house without another word, but right before she stepped outside, she paused. Then, without turning around, she muttered, "You're going to regret this." I didn't answer. Didn't flinch. Didn't react. I just watched as she walked out of my life. And for the first time in months, I breathed. The door shut behind her with a hollow thud. The sound echoed through the house, bouncing off the walls, filling the space she had just left. For a long moment, I didn't move. I just stood there, staring at the door, listening to the quiet that followed. It should have felt like victory. I had done what she never thought I would. I had taken control, kicked her out, cut her loose. And yet, there was something about the silence that didn't sit right. Maybe it was the weight of the past 6 years pressing down on me all at once. The memories, the late-night conversations, the laughter that I had once believed was real. Or maybe it was just the realization of what came next. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I turned away from the door, exhaling slowly, rubbing a hand down my face. My mind was still burning, still pulsing with everything that had just happened. But I couldn't let myself sink into it. Not yet. I needed to think. I needed a plan. Because she wasn't going to make this easy. I walked through the house slowly, my feet heavy against the floor. The living room felt different. The couch where she used to curl up with a blanket and a glass of wine, the coffee table littered with magazines she never actually read, it all felt like it belonged to someone else now. I stopped in front of the hallway mirror. The man staring back at me didn't look like the same person from a few hours ago. He looked older, sharper. He looked like a man who had just been gutted and stitched himself back together with sheer force of will. And he wasn't done yet. I grabbed my phone and scrolled through my contacts, my fingers hovering over a familiar name. My lawyer. I had been serious when I told her that the divorce was already in motion. I wasn't the kind of man who made empty threats. The second I started noticing the cracks in our marriage, the nights out, the late hours, the way she started treating me like a roommate instead of a husband, I had prepared myself for this possibility. And now here we were. I pressed dial and lifted the phone to my ear. It rang twice before a tired voice answered. This better be important. It is. My voice came out calm. Steady. I need to move forward with the paperwork. There was a pause. Then a sigh. She finally screw up bad enough? I let out a humorless chuckle. You could say that. He didn't ask for details. Didn't need to. He just got straight to the point. All right. I'll push everything through first thing in the morning. Make it airtight, I said. I don't want her taking a single thing that isn't hers. Got it. I hung up and tossed the phone onto the couch, letting out a slow breath. Step 1 complete. Now step 2. Because this wasn't just about divorcing her. This was about him. My brother. The little snake who had slithered into my life, stolen what wasn't his, and grinned in my face like he hadn't just destroyed everything. I could forgive a lot of things. But not this. I picked up my phone again, scrolling to another number. A number I hadn't called in a while. Then I hit dial. It rang once. Twice. Then a familiar voice answered, low and cautious. Hello. I smirked. Hey, Dad, I said. We need to talk. There was a pause on the other end of the line. A long, heavy silence before my father finally spoke. This about your brother? I exhaled through my nose. Of course, he already knew. My father had a way of seeing the storm before it hit. He had always been that way, sharp, calculating, the kind of man who didn't say much but knew everything. He's been screwing my wife, I said bluntly. No sugarcoating. No hesitation. Silence. Then a quiet, I see. That was it. No shock. No outrage. Just 2 words, spoken in the same steady tone he always used when he was thinking. I waited, gripping the phone tight, the anger still hot in my veins. I knew what my father was doing. He was processing, gathering the details in his head like he was assembling a puzzle. Then, finally, meet me tomorrow, he said. I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. Where? The house. Of course. Neutral ground. A place where conversations like this had been had before. I'll be there, I said. He hung up without another word. I let the phone drop to my side, staring at nothing, my heartbeat still pounding in my ears. This was bigger than just me now, because family had rules, and my brother had broken them. The next morning, I drove to my parents' house. It was a place I had been to 1,000 times, a place that had once felt warm, safe, filled with childhood memories. But today it felt like something else, like a war room. I pulled up to the driveway, cut the engine, and sat there for a moment. The house looked the same, pristine, well-kept, the lawn trimmed to perfection. But inside, I knew it was about to become the site of something ugly. I stepped out of the car and walked to the door. Before I could knock, it swung open. My father stood there, tall and composed, dressed in his usual crisp button-down and slacks. His expression was unreadable. Come in, he said. I stepped inside, and there, sitting on the couch, was him. My brother. His arms were draped over the back of the couch, legs stretched out like he didn't have a single care in the world. He was dressed casually, jeans, a t-shirt, like this was just another Sunday morning. Like he hadn't just burned everything to the ground. He looked up at me, eyes unreadable. Hey. I clenched my jaw. My fists curled at my sides. You have some nerve showing up here. I live here, he said, smirking. Or did you forget? The urge to punch him square in the face was almost unbearable. Our father cleared his throat. Sit. I didn't move. I just stared at my brother, watching the smug look on his face, the way he was enjoying this. Then finally, I stepped forward and dropped onto the chair across from him. My father remained standing, looking between us like he was reading every unspoken word. You want to explain yourself? He finally asked, his voice calm, measured. My brother let out a breath, tilting his head. What's there to explain? I clenched my teeth so hard it hurt. You slept with my wife. He shrugged, like this was nothing, like I was the one making a big deal out of it. You weren't happy, he said. She wasn't happy. It was gonna happen eventually. I saw red. I shot up from my chair so fast it scraped against the floor. You arrogant piece of... Sit down, my father ordered. The authority in his voice made me freeze. I inhaled sharply, forcing myself to drop back into the chair, my muscles still coiled with tension. My father exhaled slowly. I always knew you were selfish, he said, looking at my brother now. But I didn't think you were this stupid. For the first time, my brother's smirk faltered. Just slightly. You didn't just betray your brother, our father continued. You betrayed this family. My brother rolled his eyes. Oh, come on. It's not that deep. Not that deep? I snapped. You don't just sleep with your brother's wife and call it a mistake. You don't sit there like you deserve something out of this. He met my gaze, something dark flickering in his eyes. Maybe I do. Silence. Cold, suffocating silence. Then my father spoke again, his voice low. Get out. My brother blinked. What? You heard me, our father said. Get out of my house. For the first time, my brother looked unsteady. His smirk vanished. You can't be serious. Our father's expression didn't change. You think you can betray your own blood and still have a place here? He shook his head. You're no son of mine. My brother let out a short laugh, but there was something hollow in it now. You're actually kicking me out over this? My father didn't blink. Get your things. Leave. I stared at him, watching as the reality of the situation finally sank in for him. And then, for the first time since this entire thing started, I felt something like justice. My brother sat there, frozen, like his brain was refusing to process what had just happened. For the first time, his cocky, smug expression had cracked. His mouth opened slightly, then closed. He looked at our father, searching for any sign that this was a bluff, a threat that could be talked down. But our father's face remained cold, unmoving. "Dad," he said, a forced chuckle in his voice. "You can't be serious." Our father exhaled through his nose, slow and controlled. "I've never been more serious in my life." My brother let out a humorless laugh, shifting in his seat. "Over a woman?" I clenched my fists at my sides, barely stopping myself from lunging at him. "You still don't get it," our father said, shaking his head. His voice was eerily calm, but I knew that was when he was at his most dangerous. "This isn't just about her." He gestured toward me. "You betrayed him, your own brother." My brother scoffed, his bravado returning like a second skin. "So what? People cheat. It happens. It's not like I murdered someone." "No," my father said, his voice turning sharp. "You did something worse." That made my brother pause. His jaw twitched, his fingers flexing against his knee. "Worse than murder?" he repeated, sarcasm dripping from his voice. "Yes," my father said simply. "Because when you kill a man, it's final. It's done. But betrayal? Betrayal rots. It lingers, poisons everything. And the worst part," he leaned forward slightly, his voice lowering to something almost dangerous. "You betrayed the one person in this world who would have always had your back." My brother swallowed. His bravado was slipping. I watched him closely, my jaw tight, my nails digging into my palm. Because that was the truth. I had protected him our entire lives. I had taken the hits for him when we were kids. I had stood up for him when he made mistakes. I had been his brother in every sense of the word. And in return, he had burned everything to the ground without a second thought. I should have expected it. I should have. But the worst betrayals always come from the ones closest to you. My brother finally stood up. "This is ridiculous." His voice wavered slightly, but he covered it with irritation. "You're seriously going to throw me out over this?" Our father didn't even blink. "You made your choices." My brother clenched his jaw. He turned to me now, his eyes hard. "And you're just going to let this happen?" I tilted my head slightly. "What exactly do you think I owe you?" He flinched. And that's when I knew he had expected me to fight for him. He had expected me to be the one to argue, to say, "No, Dad, don't do this." Because that's who I had always been. The older brother who bailed him out, who fixed his messes, who forgave. But not this time. This time, I wanted him to feel every ounce of what he had done. "I hope she was worth it," I said, my voice calm. His eyes flashed. "You think this is over?" I let out a quiet laugh. "It already is." He scoffed, shaking his head, his hands curling into fists. He wanted to hit me. I could see it. The tension in his muscles, the way his weight shifted ever so slightly. And I wished he would. I wished he'd give me the excuse to knock him to the ground, to beat the smugness out of him the way he deserved. But he didn't. Because underneath all of it, underneath the arrogance, the betrayal, the selfishness, he was a coward. He turned sharply, shoving past me, storming toward the stairs. "Fine. I'll pack my shit." Our father nodded. "Good." My brother hesitated at the base of the stairs, like he wanted to say something else, but then he clenched his jaw and stomped up to his room. The second he was gone, my father exhaled. It was a small sound, barely there, but it was the first real sign of emotion I had seen from him since this whole conversation started. He turned to me, his gaze steady. "You all right?" I let out a slow breath, feeling the weight of everything settling over me. "I don't know." He nodded once, as if that was the only answer he had expected. Then he placed a firm hand on my shoulder. "You'll be fine," he said. Not a question. Not a possibility. A statement. A fact. I swallowed, nodded. Because maybe, just maybe, he was right. I drove home in silence. No music. No distractions. Just the hum of the engine and the weight of everything settling over me. It was over. Or at least, the worst of it was. My wife was gone. My brother had been kicked out. The two people who had torn through my life like a hurricane were finally out of it. And yet, I didn't feel relief. Not yet. The thing about betrayal is that it doesn't end the second you walk away. It lingers. It infects everything, seeps into your bones, makes you question everything you ever knew. Because if the two people closest to me could do this, then what did that say about everything else in my life? Had I been blind? Had I been stupid? I pulled into my driveway and killed the engine, staring at the house. It looked different now. Not because anything had changed physically, but because I had changed. I stepped inside and was hit with the quiet. The kind of quiet that felt both freeing and suffocating at the same time. For the past few months, I had suspected something was wrong. I had felt it. The way she distanced herself, the way she laughed at things I wasn't a part of, the way she looked at me like I was just some man she happened to share a house with. And the entire time I had told myself I was overthinking. That I was being paranoid. But I wasn't. I had been right. I walked through the living room, letting my fingers trail along the edge of the couch. She used to sit there, curled up with a blanket, scrolling through her phone, probably texting him. I used to sit next to her, thinking we were just going through a rough patch. Thinking that if I just held on, we'd find our way back to each other. God, I had been a fool. I made my way to the kitchen, opening the fridge out of habit, but nothing inside appealed to me. I wasn't hungry. I was tired. Not physically. Not in the way that sleep could fix. I grabbed a glass of water and leaned against the counter, staring out the window at the darkened street. And for the first time since this whole thing started, I let myself feel it. Not just the anger. Not just the betrayal. But the loss. Because that's what this was. A loss. Not of her. I had no doubt in my mind that I was better off without her, but of the life I thought I had. The future I thought we were building. The trust that had been shattered beyond repair. I had wasted years on someone who didn't deserve me. And that hurt. I took a slow sip of water, letting out a breath. But at the same time, there was something else beneath the grief. Something quiet. Something like freedom. For months, I had been trapped in this sinking ship, trying to plug the holes, trying to fix something that was already doomed. But now I didn't have to fix anything. I could let it go. I pushed off the counter, setting my glass down, and made my way to the bedroom. I stepped inside and took it all in. The bed. The framed photos. The closet, half empty now that I had thrown her out. It still felt like her, like the ghost of our marriage was lingering in the walls, but I knew that wouldn't last forever. This house didn't belong to her anymore. It belonged to me. And I was going to make damn sure that every last trace of her was gone. I walked over to the dresser and grabbed one of the framed photos of us. A vacation picture, something that had felt important at the time. I stared at it for a long moment. Then, without hesitation, I threw it into the trash. Piece by piece, I was going to take my life back. And when I was done, I wasn't going to look back.